Much like the macro presentation of space, I feel that the micro presentation of particles and the subatomic world is just as fallacious and false.
The periodic nature of elements, the periodic table explained. Although the periodic table of elements looks complex, it is easier to follow once you learn how to use it. First, the letters are symbols. Each box represents an element. Each element is made up of the same kind of atom with a specific number of protons in its nucleus.
Okay, so they just posited a few things. They said each element is made up of a number of protons in its nucleus. The elements are demonstrable. We know that there's 92, or some say 94 natural elements, and then there's a bunch of man-made ones that they said they made within the last 100 years for a total of like 118, as you see there. But when they tell you of these supposed protons that form the atomic mass, you must understand the subatomic world, electrons, protons, neutrons, these are theory. They're unevidenced. You can't see them. You can't measure them. You certainly can't test them. I'm going to teach you all how this subatomic world is just as fanciful as the idea of space.
The atomic number. For example, H represents hydrogen. All hydrogen atoms have one proton. The symbol He represents helium. All helium atoms have two protons. The elements are arranged.
Notice hydrogen. Now, although hydrogen is placed there at number 1 in the first column, hydrogen actually is different from every other element because it has a particular function that no other element has. Hydrogen can be both positively and negatively ionized. The other elements do not hold that same characteristic. Their ionization, whether they are positive or negative, depends on their location in relation to the noble gases. But without getting too complex, just remember, hydrogen is an element unto itself. Some theorize, including myself, that hydrogen is really the only element that exists, and that everything else is just a more complex or a denser vibration of hydrogen. If you get away from the lie, if you get away from the indoctrination, and if you look at this world for what it very well likely is, energy, frequency, and vibration, you can understand that what we call material or matter is just a particular vibration along a grand spectrum of frequency. And that hydrogen, which they conceptualize as the base element, may be the only physical thing that there is, and then everything builds off of it.
Are arranged by increasing atomic number. The atomic number displays how many protons are present in the nucleus of the atom. The table is also very colorful. Each box is color-coded to show whether the element is a metal or non-metal.
So, a lot of people might not know this, but this is so simple that I think it goes above people's heads. When you break down all the elements of this world, it basically comes down to 3 things. You have hydrogen, which is by itself, but then you have metals versus non-metals. That's everything that there is that we know of in this physical reality. It comes down to metals and non-metals. When you might say, well, what makes a metal a metal? 3 things. A metal is typically shiny. A metal is typically malleable, which means you can shape it. And a metal conducts electricity. Now, certain metals are better conductors of electricity than others. That's most of the elements that you find. The other ones, the non-metals, well, you say, what are they? It's basically anything that's not that. And that includes things that could be in multiple forms, like liquids and gases and things like that. So everything comes down to metals and non-metals. Now, those metals and non-metals combine in different ways to make more complex structures. For instance, if a metal and a non-metal combines, that is called an ionic compound. If two non-metals bind, that binding process is called a molecule. That's the difference between molecules and compounds. Molecules are non-metals. Compounds are metals binding with a non-metal,
indicating the specific type. If you take a closer look at one element in particular, you will find its atomic number, atomic mass, element name, and element symbol. Looking at the overall table again, you will notice that it is made up of columns and rows. The columns are known as groups, and the rows are known as periods. All elements in a group have similar characteristics. These characteristics will tell you how many valence electrons, the electrons in the outer shell of the atom, are present in that atom.
I want to show and point out the logical leap that was made there, the fallacious leap. The true statement, all elements in a group have similar characteristics. That is a true statement. The functioning and the chemistry associated with each element, you may be surprised to know, was discovered and laid out many decades before the supposed discovery of the electrons. But they're just going to tell you that the reason that these particular groups have a particular valence or have a particular affinity to bind with other elements is because of the electrons. And then they're going to further go on and talk about the electron configuration and how there's certain shells of orbiting electrons. I want to impose this to my listeners. All that is complete theory and conjecture. Oh, what do you mean, Z? You're a goofy guy saying there's no such thing as electrons? No, I'm saying electrons are unevidenced. To say that they exist is a falsehood. Just like when they say that the reason that you stick to the earth is because of something called the theory of gravitation and the bending and warping of space-time based on Einstein's 1910 theory of general relativity. Nonsense, non-demonstrable, unevidenced. If you want to look at this world with a degree of logic and reason and critical thought, you have to discover and realize the process of cause and effect. That's what science comes down to, cause and effect. True science is a method to elucidate the cause of an effect that you can observe in nature as a phenomenon, nothing more, nothing less. If you start assuming and presupposing the cause, you are engaging in pseudoscience and scientism. When you tell me that certain groups in the periodic table have certain characteristics that dictate their affinity to bond with other atoms, that is evidenced. When you start to tell me it's because of these supposed orbiting electron configuration and clouds, that is scientism, that is bullshit. Let's continue.
Giving you an idea about how they bond. Here are the element groups and the number of valence electrons present. Count from the left, but skip over the transition metals because these are a little more complex. The periods display the number of electron shells that are present in the atom. We will not get into much detail about this, but notice that as you move down through the periods, the number of electron shells will increase.
They're presenting things as fact, which are merely theory at best. And they're presenting it to children. And you could think it's innocuous and you could think that there's no big deal. They are doing it for a reason. They are engineering a mindset. They're engineering a world view, one in which they're trying to destroy any idea of a creator or a God. And they're bringing you into a physical world of material that does not exist.
Another trend you will notice is the size of the atom, or the atomic radius. As you move down through the periods, the atoms become larger, increasing the atomic radius.
By the way, there's no evidence of that. The only thing the atoms do as they increase in number is become more dense and therefore heavier. That's all. They just become more dense. It has nothing to do with supposed radius. You can't see an atom. It's not evidenced. You can only see something based off the tenets of vision. When we talk about the visual light spectrum and visual acuity, it is a very particular bandwidth along the entire wide spectrum of electromagnetic energy. The frequencies of visual light, you can measure the wavelength. The reason you cannot see an atom is because its size, or its conjectured size, is smaller than the wavelength associated with the bandwidth of visual acuity. You can't see the supposed atom because you can't see the supposed atom, not even with a microscope. Now, they're going to tell you that they have things like electron microscopes, but if you look into that, you understand they just call it an electron microscope. They're going to tell you that they use certain principles to project light through slits and measure the supposed photons. You have to understand, this is all interpretation and interpolation. The atom and the subatomic world is unevidenced. Therefore, it does not exist. It is not real.
As you move from left to right across the groups, the atoms become smaller, decreasing the atomic radius. The opposite is true for an atom's ionization energy, or how readily an electron can be removed from an atom. As you move down through the periods, the ionization energy will decrease. As you move from left to right across the groups, the ionization energy will increase.